Hi, and welcome back to another edition of Watching Mormon Apologetics, so you don't have to. Today we're going to be responding to FairMormon's video about the first vision of Joseph Smith, the founding prophet of Mormonism.
And as you can imagine, it is an absolute... That's a callback.
The official narrative of the LDS Church is that in 1820, when Joseph Smith was 14 years old, he went to a grove of trees near his house, feeling the weight of the world on him, wondering which church he should join. He knelt down and asked God which church he should join, and first, in one of the official accounts, Satan comes and tries to destroy him, binds his tongue so he can't speak, and then a pillar of light falls exactly over his head, and in the light he sees two people, God the Father and Jesus Christ, who say to him that he shouldn't join any church because they're all wrong, and that he's going to be the guy to bring back the true church. And he goes home, and then he tells people...
no one for 12 years.
That's not the official version.
No, I know.
The official version is that he tells his family and the public that he goes around telling people, and that he receives a lot of persecution for it. So yeah, it's a big thing for most Mormons. Most Mormons, like, in some regard, hinge their testimony on the reality of this event having occurred. Even though I'm sure not too many would say, like, it's their one thing, unless they got their testimony at the Hill Cumorah pageant or something.
As I'm sure many did.
Yeah. So the reality is a little different than the history. I feel like you're the history buff on this one.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of research for this video. I did know about conflicting First Vision accounts, and they were a factor in why I left the church. It wasn't one of the top tier issues. I'd say that was more polygamy, racism. But yeah, Banksy.
Banksy.
You little attention seeker. He's been quiet all day. But yeah, like, finding out about conflicting First Vision accounts was definitely, affected me as a person going through a faith crisis, because contrary to what we're about to see FairMormon try and argue, the accounts are extremely different, like beyond, way beyond minor differences, like completely different contents, completely different intents and purposes. So to
understand the significance of the different accounts of the first vision, you have to understand that Joseph Smith is coming from, like, a mainstream Protestant background. I say mainstream. He was also, like, deeply steeped in folk ritual magic, and something that I'll mention a little later because it's just kind of an interesting little tangent. But his family's leaning Presbyterian and Methodist, and they have this pretty common view of a Trinitarian God, God the Father, Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit, all being one entity. And in the beginning of Joseph's teachings, it seems abundantly evident in the Book of Mormon. Every time it talks about Jesus, it talks about them being in the same form, and later it was changed to say, rather than saying God appeared, it was the Lamb of God appeared. And as Joseph Smith's idea of the Trinity changed, so did the historical narrative.
Yeah, for those of you who thought that there were only punctuation changes to the Book of Mormon, dead wrong. There's doctrinal changes. I think it was something, at least 7 years, where the church taught in the Book of Mormon, in scriptures, in everyone who taught in a church setting, Joseph Smith, blah, 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 they all taught that God the Father, God, Jesus, Holy Ghost were all one being. And then they completely changed all the references sat in the Book of Mormon, which seems like a very significant point of doctrine. And now it's something that, I think I remember when I was getting missionary lessons, that's something they talk about, like how absurd it is to think that they would be one when clearly they're three. The church isn't... the church sees that as, like, a strength of its doctrine, I think, don't they?
Totally.
But I think it is worth talking about how, the experience that Joseph claimed to have, whichever version really, is not an uncommon experience throughout religious history. Like, even in Joseph's time, I was just listening to a podcast yesterday. Oh, I think it was a Mormon Stories with Sandra Tanner and then some other researchers. But anyway, they were saying that at Joseph's time, it wouldn't be crazy for you to go to, the people in your town and be like, I saw God.
That's definitely a Mormon talking point that, hey, Banksy, don't go out there. That's a very delicate light structure.
You have no idea. That is built on a house of cards, like this whole operation.
Part of the narrative is that prior to Joseph Smith, the heavens were closed. God was not communicating with humanity. And yet, like, all around this time and prior, there's plenty of accounts of people having identical experiences as Joseph Smith. And there's one from Norris Stearns, published in 1850. At length, as I lay apparently upon the brink of eternal woe, seeing nothing but death before me, suddenly there came a sweet flow of love of God to my soul, which gradually increased. At the same time there appeared a small gleam of light in the room above the brightness of the sun, then at his meridian, which grew brighter and brighter. At length, being in ecstasy of joy, I turned to the other side of the bed, whether in the body or out, I cannot tell, God knoweth. There I saw two spirits, which I knew at first sight, but if I had not the tongue of an angel, could not describe their glory, for they were brought the joys of heaven with them. One was God my Maker, almost in bodily shape like a man. His face was as it were a flame of fire, and his body as it had been a pillar and a cloud. Below him stood Jesus Christ my Redeemer, in perfect shape like a man. So, like, using some of the exact same terminology Joseph Smith did.
Above the brightness of the sun.
Yeah, his face as a flame of fire. I'm not saying that Joseph Smith was like heard this guy's story and like wrote it down. And,
yeah. But it was like, it was there in his psyche.
Yes.
He had absorbed different experiences like this from other people. You've got a bunch all from Joseph's time and area.
Minister Elias Smith. I went into the woods. A light appeared from heaven. My mind seemed to rise to the light to the throne of God and the Lamb. Someone else. It seemed as if my mind was struck motionless, as well as into nothing. Before me the awful and glorious majesty of the great Jehovah. He then spake. He also told me that every denomination of professing Christians had become extremely corrupt. That's a pretty common thing, is being told that every denomination is corrupt, and the person getting called to preach the good news.
It's almost like, there's something in us that knows that these like dogmatic Christian religions aren't the peak of spirituality. So we're like, they're all corrupt. And the answer is me starting my own church instead of just like me having my own spiritual experience and finding out for myself. It's like, no, I just need a different organized religion. That'll solve the problem.
It's just like so many examples of people using the exact same...
Very similar.
Like words to describe the same verbiage.
And sort of the same, like this one, Ellen White at age 12... felt guilty for her sins and was filled with terror about being eternally lost.
It's worth noting that Ellen White, so she's the co-founder of the Seventh-day Adventists, and like she describes the exact same situation. Even Joseph Smith, in some of the accounts, he talks about being different ages. In some, he says like 14, other 15, 14, other 16, 12 even, he starts talking about. Anyway, she's 12. She's feeling the exact same thing he's feeling. She talks about spending nights in tears and prayer and staying in this condition for several months.
Like, what's made this 12-year-old so worried about the state of her soul? Clearly this environment was unhealthy.
She says, while praying, the thick darkness that had enveloped me was scattered. A bright light, like a ball of fire, came towards me, and as it fell upon me, my strength was taken away. I seemed to be in the presence of Jesus and the angels. Again it was repeated, make known to others what I have revealed to you. And she went on to have like some 200 more revelations. And it's interesting to note that the Adventists to this day have about 20 million members, even though her vision was like, I think 5-10 years after Joseph Smith was supposed to have happened. And didn't Fair make a point in their video that like the Mormon churches or the LDS Church is growing so much as a sign of its truthfulness?
Did they make that point?
I mean,
if so, why?
The LDS Church certainly does often, that their growth is a sign of the divinity of the work. And it's like, well, the other church that started the exact same time, under the exact same circumstances.
And they're vegetarians. So point to them.
So we can see that this isn't an uncommon experience, especially given the time and place, and that it also wasn't uncommon for Joseph Smith as he goes on to revise his history in order to present a more cohesive narrative, because they were all just kind of figuring it out as they went. They were they didn't know in the beginning. I mean, he didn't even know in the beginning that he was going to start a church, but now the narrative is kind of, he went to find out which church to join. God said that was...
Which we're going to get into the reasoning behind that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And this isn't the only example of him doing that. There's, like, the case of restoring the priesthood, like... Didn't
he only get the sealing power like a year before he died?
Something.
But he was
like
marrying
that.
women for like, I don't know, 10 years or however long.
Whoopsie.
Whoops.
You know, Joseph Smith claimed to have received the priesthood from Peter, James, John, and John the Baptist. But that was not something that anybody had heard about until several years later. David Whitmer, one of the 3 witnesses of the Book of Mormon, said, "I never heard that an angel had ordained Joseph and Oliver to the Aaronic priesthood until the year 1834, 35, or 36 in Ohio. I do not believe that John the Baptist ever ordained Joseph and Oliver." That's
Damn.
just interesting that someone who was like on the ground floor of this whole operation had never heard that mentioned until later when they're trying to organize things and come up with a narrative that will allow for this. Yeah.
With the first vision too. Also just important to note that at the time, like the word vision generally seemed to mean like second sight or seeing something with spiritual eyes and not a physical visitation. So Martin Harris talked about that, didn't he? Like he saw the golden plates with his spiritual eyes or with second sight.
Or he saw Jesus in the form of a deer walking and talking with him.
Yes, that one's... Jury's out on that one. But yeah, just another important thing to note. So again, it's unlikely that Joseph would have been persecuted for being like, "Hey guys, I saw God," because I felt like everyone was doing it. It was like the hip thing.
Oh yeah, and that's another thing I want to mention is that he talks about being persecuted for having said that he had this specific vision, and yet, despite through the initial years of the church, there having been like constant newspaper articles about him, pamphlets being written on both sides by the Mormons and by their critics, not a single person mentions the first vision story.
No one's like, that's crazy.
It's all about the angel Moroni, which was the experience wherein he was directed
Nephi.
/ Nephi, depending on which part
Joseph's
of
mood that day. What he was going for.
So we have some quotes from like early brethren who talk about the first vision and are clearly under the impression that it was just an angel. It was like Moroni who appeared, and that's it.
Joseph Smith's brother, William Smith, said, "While engaged in prayer, a light appeared in the heavens and descended until it rested upon the trees. An angel then appeared to Joseph and conversed with him upon many things. He told him that none of the sects were right, but that if he was faithful in keeping the commandments, he should receive, the true way should be made known to him, that his sins were forgiven, etc." So
it seems obvious. An angel. Specifically the angel Moroni. Like, it wasn't like, oh, there was God and Jesus and angels, and it seems like you could be like, well, he probably just got him mixed up in his mind, but literally all the brethren do the same thing. Brigham Young, "The Lord did not come with the armies of heaven, but he did send his angel to the same obscure person, Joseph Smith Jr., who afterwards became a prophet, seer, and revelator, and informed him that he should not join any of the religious sects of the day, for they were all wrong."
Wilford Woodruff, "The same organization and gospel that Christ died for is again established in this generation. How did it come? By the ministering of an holy angel from God out of heaven, who held converse with man and revealed unto him the darkness that enveloped the world. He told him the gospel was not among men and that there was not blah, 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 blah." George A. Smith, "He, Joseph Smith, went humbly before the Lord and inquired of him, and the Lord answered his prayer and revealed to Joseph by the ministration of angels the true condition of the religious world, blah, blah, blah." John Taylor, "How was it and which was right? None of them was right, just as it was when the prophet Joseph asked the angel of which of the sects was right that he might join it." Big angel energy in all of these quotes.
All of the people close to Joseph Smith are saying, Joseph Smith was wondering which church was right, and he asked God, and an angel appeared and told him. And that was the story that all the neighbors were telling when they were saying Joseph Smith is a liar and a deceiver, saying that angels have come and he's given them a golden Bible.
Well, I think we should get into the fair video now.
Let's do it.
You guys have waited long enough. Joseph Smith saw God, ... Deal with it. Humorous CES letter, first vision rebuttal. I'm glad it's going to be humorous, you know.
The first vision of Joseph Smith, a beautiful and foundational event in Latter-day Saint theology. Attacking the first vision is one of the few things that brings Trump-voting, beer-drinking Southern Republican Christians into agreement with Bernie-loving, kombucha-sipping Northwestern atheists.
The two genders.
This section of the CES letter quotes President Hinckley saying, "Our whole strength rests on the validity of that first vision. It either occurred or it did not occur. If it did not, then this whole work is a fraud. If it did, then it is the most important and wonderful work under the heavens."
Well, in a context, that quote may seem like a seed to plant doubt, but unlike the author of the CES letter, I can read more than just the easy quips.
Okay, just a little comment that he's making, implying that Jeremy is, only capable of reading little quips. And I don't know, maybe Quaker has read the CES letter all the way through, but I'm like, Jeremy does not seem like someone who is interested in digesting only, bite-sized information. Like, the amount of research he put into the CES letter is very intense. And it's just all part of this narrative that we're seeing Tits do a lot on this show of just creating this caricature of anti-Mormons, which is really typical for Hyde religions and cults. They create these caricatures of the type of people who leave, people who leave Mormonism are sinful or lazy.
Funny, I posted it on our Instagram. I looked, I was like, are there any Scientology apologetics out there? So I looked up, and I found this letter that they had written about Leah Remini, where they literally were like, she's just a bitter, angry ex-Scientologist.
Couldn't keep the rules.
Yeah, was living unethical, and she is just stirring up drama to get fame.
That was so scary. I mean, the Scientologists are definitely next level.
I love this quote by President Hinckley. "I am not worried that the prophet Joseph Smith gave a number of versions of the first vision any more than I am worried that there are 4 different writers of the Gospels in the New Testament, each with his own perceptions, each telling the events to meet his own purpose for writing at the time."
4 different people writing the same story, it makes more sense for that to be different than for, one person to write 4 completely different stories.
It is funny too how they use they tried to make Jeremy using Gordon B. Hinckley's quote as this taking it out of context, trying to plant the seed of doubt. And it's like it's just too supportive. That was basically the same thing. It was just longer. That also creates doubt in the same way, because it's okay, you obviously really believe this. It's obviously a key part of your faith and something that should be carefully analyzed.
Also, it kind of suggests a bit of a guilty conscience in a way, because the fact that you're saying that him sharing that quote is somehow suggesting, I don't know. It's
something nefarious.
It's just a bit weird, because if you think that this actually happened and there's not a problem, then you can just be like, yeah, he's reached the wrong conclusion. But I don't know, there's a lot of I feel like him using that quote is not a big deal at all. He's just pointing out, this is why this issue matters to me. Because for those of you who don't know, the CES letter was a compilation of questions that Jeremy sent to a CES letter who was, I think his
CS
dad
director.
was in contact with him or something. I don't know. He had a connection, and this guy had agreed to hear his questions when he heard that Jeremy was doubting the church. So he's, it's what you do in an essay. You're I'm bringing this up because of this. He's just providing supporting information. This matters to me because this man who I would like to think is a prophet. 'Cause when Jeremy first wrote it, he's hoping it's still true.
We should do a Martin Luther sketch where the Catholic Church is Martin Luther tries in his 95 Thesis. They take everything out of context.
Wrecked again.
Now, the CES letter states that there are at least 4 different first vision accounts by Joseph Smith.
It also says that the church admits this in the Gospel Topics essays. Okay, spoiler, one of the goals of the CES letter is to convince the readers that the church hides its information.
Can we also say that that's actually a true statement? Here's a quote by Elder Stephen E. Snow.
Oh yeah, I have a bunch for this.
"I think in the past there was a tendency to keep a lot of the records closed, or at least not give access to information. But the world has changed in the last generation. With the access to information on the internet, we can't continue that pattern."
So in 1950, Levi Young, who was president of the First Quorum of the 70, requested access to the journal that this first vision account was written in, and Joseph Fielding Smith denied him, as he did Sandra Tanner and others. Levi went over his head and obtained clearance, gaining access to the private safe only after promising not to tell anyone or copy anything. And then in 1952, Lamar Peterson, who was an amateur historian, interviewed Levi, and Levi mentioned a strange account of the first vision that he'd seen, but he said it had to remain confidential, which this Peterson, this amateur historian, he did maintain this confidentiality until Levi's death in 1963, at which time he told Gerald and Sandra Tanner about it, who began writing about the document. Yeah, lots of attempts to keep it hidden. Joseph Fielding Smith was the king of keeping stuff locked in the vault. He was like, no, there's no seer stone. It's an anti-Mormon lie. Meanwhile, it's in the church's vault.
Yeah, that's the kind of statement by FairMormon that is gonna really bite them in the end, because you do just a little searching and you see that the first vision is one topic, and there are a lot of topics and a lot of information that the church doesn't want getting out there and hasn't wanted getting out there and has tried a lot to suppress from getting out there. And it will not take a lot of digging to see that. I mean, there's so many records of different quotes of Boyd K. Packer essentially saying to the effect, like, historians idolize the truth. Like,
so he has a hard time with them.
Yeah, being honest doesn't mean you tell everything.
Yeah, historians should tell only that part of the truth that is inspiring and uplifting, Boyd K. Packer said.
Love that.
Love that for us.
Even old school church videos talk about this. I mean, look at this terrible quality old VHS video of the first vision from 1976.
During this time of great excitement, my mind was called up to serious reflection and great uneasiness, considering that all could not be right and that God could not be the author of so much confusion. I determined to investigate the subject more fully.
What did that show? That was just the church's official narrative
Video.
about the first vision, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I mean they took two like narrative elements, one about like I forget, but basically they used lines from two different ones, and then they're being like, see, the church is being straightforward and honest about this. But like, what is really the most damning thing is the actual vision, where it's like either an angel or Jesus and God or just
how
Jesus.
does that video prove their
And
point?
they didn't show that at all. Like, that's the important part we're talking about, not like...
They were talking about they were like, no, the church hasn't hidden conflicting first vision accounts, and then they just show a video that is just like standard church narrative. Pretty much. Like, how does that prove anything?
It literally does
They do
not
this
like show any forthrightness about the issue at all.
Are they aware that, because they did some things like this in the last video, and I'm like, are they aware that they're doing it, and they just think people are that stupid, or are they just unaware?
I think they're unaware. I think
They're
they
just kinda
like have
looking
not
for whatever
connected
and-
those dots. And they're just like, oh, see, that is a reference to this letter, that's a reference to that letter. Therefore, the church is using both of the records and is therefore honest. But it's like, that's not really the
that's
issue
not what
here.
we're saying. It's like, I'm sure that video didn't go on to say that God and Jesus weren't involved in the vision, it was just an angel, or that like Jesus was there but God wasn't. Like, it doesn't help your case at all.
And in that, they didn't like indicate that there were two different
No,
records. It just sounded
exactly,
like a paraphrase
exactly.
of the story.
Now, obviously, there are different accounts of the first vision.
Humorous.
Each one works together so well. However, anti-Mormons like to create problems that don't exist.
But each one doesn't work together so well. That's just false, because these accounts are completely contradictory, as we've said. In the first one that we have in Joseph's own handwriting, it doesn't mention God and Jesus, it just mentions Jesus. But yeah, they don't work together so well. Another example is that, he's claiming that in 1820 God told him, don't join any of the churches because they're all wrong. Well, then why did Joseph try and join the Methodist Church in 1828, 8 years after that vision? And again, important to note that he didn't write down this first vision until 12 years later, after this thing with the Methodists had happened. So again, we're going to get a bit more into that, but start to see the holes.
The reason he wasn't allowed to join the Methodist Church was because they didn't want
magic.
too much magic. They were like, we don't want this guy. He's not a real Christian.
Also, it's not just about those differences. It's the fact that all the church doctrine at that time aligned with that. So, for example, at the time when he's saying he just saw Jesus, that was at the time when everyone in the church was being taught that God and Jesus were one.
So let's address these problems. The first problem is that in the 1832 account, Joseph only talks about the Lord and not the Father and the Lord. Now, obviously, this isn't a contradiction. If a child leaves his house and says that he talked to his mom, it doesn't mean that his dad wasn't there and vice versa. If the 1832 account explicitly said, I spoke with Jesus and saw Jesus alone as the only host of heaven, then it would be an issue, but it doesn't say that. It just gives emphasis to the Son. Written in private, it wasn't meant to be a declarative statement on church history.
If I came to you and I said, Tanner, I met the Vice President of the United States today.
The Vice President? Wow.
I wouldn't miss out the fact that the President was also there. You don't see Jesus and just forget about it. Like, it's not the same as like, oh, I had a conversation with my mum this morning and me not also being like, oh, and also my dad was in the room. It's like, I just met the president and the vice president. Like, how insane is that?
Especially coming from a Trinitarian context where that would be like such a huge doctrinal point. And this is after having only told the story of an angel or angels appearing to him.
Yeah.
This is already a mutation of the story.
The letter also notes the fact that the account was written 12 years after the event occurred. He didn't write it down in 1820 or 1821. Is that a problem? No. Joseph made clear he wasn't educated early in his life. He wasn't literate. He didn't write it down.
Wow, they just said Joseph Smith wasn't literate. Whew, okay, let us journey over to a quote from FairMormon, the very organization that you are representing. The church never taught that Joseph Smith was illiterate. The first official account of the first vision refutes this, since it demonstrates that Joseph was fully capable of reading and understanding the Bible. The statement from the critics that Joseph's family wasn't a family of illiterates argues against a point that is never being made.
Oh, I can't believe Fair let him I can't believe
How
Fair
did I know
published
who's
that.
overseeing this operation? Yeah, weren't Joseph's parents both school teachers?
Yeah.
Joseph Smith wrote in 1832, "Suffice it to say, I was merely instructed in reading and writing and the ground rules of arithmetic." And Joseph's mum said his education wasn't neglected, didn't she?
Yeah.
They're doing such a bad job. I could do a better job than this.
By the CES letter's logic, we should just assume that all illiterate people are liars unless they have diaries.
Yeah, that's the logic.
Joseph
You got
didn't
it.
really begin writing things down until 1830 when he received a revelation that becomes Doctrine and Covenants, section 20.
The letter states that the 1832 account holds Joseph to be 15 instead of 14. This is just a mistake by scribe Frederick G. Williams, not even a problem.
Just blame it on Frederick.
Damn you, Frederick! And Joseph Smith, the editor, never seemed to have a problem with it.
Now, Brad, the 1832 account doesn't say that he asked God which church to join.
This is true, but it does say he called upon the Lord, which we all assume includes asking the Lord questions about what to do. That's usually always what call upon means.
The phrase calling upon God doesn't inherently imply that you asked him which church to join and he told you that all of the churches were false and also God and Jesus were both there, even though you don't mention that God was there. The 1832 account didn't include him asking which church to join because at that time, Joseph hadn't had the experience of his mother joining the Methodist Church and then trying to get his whole family converted. And then his brother Alvin died, and the reverend implied that Alvin was going to go to hell because he wasn't baptized. And this was an event that divided Joseph's family, and it was this event that kind of created the incentive for Joseph to want a different church. Because as we've said, in 1838 he tried to join the Methodists, so clearly he wasn't told that he shouldn't join any of the churches in 1830. So the 1838 account, it's important to know the context to this account because this is a time when there was a crisis of leadership in the church. So the witnesses were leaving. There was a bunch of shit with the bank stuff. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff happening in the church at this time, and there were more dissenters, and it was this was around the time that the Danites were established, and there were assassinations, they stole property, they burned a city, Gallatin. But anyway, that's the context of this new vision emerging that does include this reference to I asked which church to join and he said none, because at this time Joseph needs to reassert his authority because he's losing it, he's kind of losing his edge, and people are leaving. So that's the context for the 1838 one, whereas in 1832, none of that had gone on yet.
The 1832 account also has no description of being attacked by Satan. Well, none of the accounts explicitly recall that, only feelings of darkness and doom. Satan is assumed by the reader and believer.
We'd like to quote Jim Bennett when he said, "The fact that Joseph doesn't feel it necessary to recount every detail of the vision every time he tells it is evidence of authenticity, not fraud. A con man gets his story straight at the outset and never varies from it. They also get nervous when the questions go to details they hadn't thought of yet. Joseph obviously felt no need to remember anything by rote. He could recount all or part of the story without fear that he'd get caught in a contradiction. I think that if this version read precisely like the more familiar 1838 version, it would be more suspicious, not less.
Nah.
I wonder which conmen Jim Bennett is talking about. Conmen are like infamous for their ability to bullshit. Like that's what they do, is they're constantly changing their narrative so that you can't pin them down on any one thing. Look at like literally any politician, particularly Donald Trump, and their ability to just blah 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 blah. They don't have to keep the details because the details don't matter to them. The only thing that matters is persuasion and sounding really confident.
Yeah, it's just a disingenuous argument because this isn't a case where, you know, the details kind of changed a bit from account to account. Like, he's making the point that, like, yeah, if someone, like, robotically rehearses, like, the same thing every time, maybe that seems a bit suspicious. But again, this is a situation where there are different accounts that also align perfectly with the different things that he taught at the time those accounts were written. So it's not just like, oh, we forgot to mention there was this other angel there as well in the background. It was like, no, you didn't mention that God was there because you believed in a Trinitarian view at that point.
The letter also claims that nobody ever knew Joseph had the vision until the 1832 account. That's just dishonest journalism.
Okay, so I started writing the script for this project in August 2019. My parents know about it, but neither of us ever communicated about this project over text. By the CES letter's logic, they had no idea this video existed until 2020. Now, just because a written recognition of it doesn't exist, doesn't mean they don't know. For Runnels to assume the family had no idea of the first vision simply because we don't have any written statements by his family about it is a flawed argument.
Insert clip of Kwaku in the polygamy video saying that if Joseph Smith had sex with the girls, the teenage girls, then we would have written evidence of it. And because we don't have written evidence of it, it obviously didn't happen.
Oh, I just saw another journal entry from Joseph Smith saying, I received the first visitation of angels when I was about 14 years old.
Yeah.
And so this isn't just like, oh, he was working on this thing and didn't mention it. Like, nobody mentioned it.
Yeah.
None of his close friends who all talked about all the goings on, who talked about an angel saying the things that he later claimed Jesus said to him. We have people who were critical of the church saying these things about him. We have him saying these things. So, yeah, it's not just like, oh, he forgot to mention it.
This detail.
It just like was not
a
part of the story for anybody, including the ones he said, because he said that they persecuted him for his religion, but no one who was persecuting him for that said anything about that.
Yeah, I know.
It was all about the Book of Mormon and the angel Moroni/Nephi.
Also, in 1831, the Reflector, a Palmyra newspaper, makes fun of Joseph for claiming he saw God. So if people are mocking Joseph for saying he had a vision, that assumes Joseph claimed he had a vision. Jeremy Runnels' claims that this had no backing until 1832 is just false.
The letter claims that Joseph's recollection of history is wrong because apparently he claimed there was a religious revival in Palmyra in 1820. The revivals were in 1817 and 1824. Okay, wait, pause.
I love a scripted wait, pause. This was written in August 2019, lest we forget. This is a year in the making.
That because there was only a revival in 1817 and 1824, it's impossible that Joseph could have had a vision during a revival in 1820. Well, first, Runnels has to prove that revivals had a cutoff point. So from 1817 to 1819, the first revival happened. And then 1820, it just ended. And there was no revival. So Joseph was lying. And then like 1821 to 22, it picked back up to go to 24. This is nonsense. First of all, revivals don't just have like an end date. It's not a day where they all woke up in Palmyra and went, all right, I'm done with religion. Let's chill for a little bit. Let's drink some barley beer or whatever they had with those Mayflower people. The point is, this is a nonsensical argument. Revivals don't just end. They kind of last for a long time. Just watch Star Wars. By the way, Star Wars is trash.
Whoa! Cut!
Researchers agree that there wasn't a revival like the one Joseph described going on in 1820. So there's ways that they can sort of show this. So people researched, for example, like Protestant church records, which, if there was a revival going on in 1820, would show an increase in church membership immediately before or after that time period. Also, newspapers and denominational publications would be, talking about it, writing about the fact that there was this revival going on. But that wasn't happening. There were no significant gains in church membership during 1820 to 21. And basically the revival, like the one Joseph Smith described, would have had greater impact than we know was going on.
Now, he did live in like a time during the Second Great Awakening, so there is obviously like a lot of religious fervor.
Yeah, they're all religious.
As the climate generally, he's living in what's called the burned over district, which was known for being exceptionally religious and explorative of new. That's why so many of the Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, they all came out of the same area and time. The Oneida commune, there was a lot of like religious experimentation, many manifestations of the spirit. So yeah, he's living in a time that's excitable, but as you said, when you go and you look at when we're just trying to line up the dates, we can say, okay, well, there wasn't like so much happening exactly at this point where he was when it may have been going on in other places.
Well, but here's why it matters, because there was a revival like the one Joseph described in 1824, which was the time when his mother got converted to Presbyterianism, and then, his family became divided after his brother died. And so basically by the time Joseph's writing like the official story that the church uses now, he's saying that, he's asking which of the churches is true in response to this revival. And again, this was at a time, when this account was written, it was when he was needing to reassert his authority. But when he wrote the first one, there's no mention of that. He wasn't going to find out which of the churches were true. He was just asking for forgiveness.
Was it that time as well? So 4 years after the first vision was supposed to have happened, so that would be 1824, when he's 18 years old. Isn't that around the time when Angel Moroni first appeared to him, and he actually started talking about angels in the first place, which is what he would have been talking about in the original stories? That timeline seems to make much more sense. So he's actually around 18 when there was a legitimate revival in the area, when he started praying in fervor for his soul and all this stuff. And then the angel did appear to him or whatever and tell him that everything was corrupt. That makes sense with the actual historical records. What is Kwaku talking about when he said revivals go on forever? Just watch Star Wars?
I think he's saying because they just keep doing new Star Wars. I think that was the joke there.
Oh.
And I kind of agree with him that Star Wars sucks.
Oh, Star Wars does suck.
Okay, there you go.
Hey, yeah.
Boom, friendship.
Thank you to our Patreon subscribers. We really appreciate you. You make this all possible.
Yes.
We're about to film a Patreon video right now, so hop on over there and check it out.
Yep, we're doing a Patreon-only Q&A. And if you do find these videos valuable and you want to support our channel, we really, really would appreciate it if you would support us on Patreon. You can do $1 a month and you get access to everything.
We always get some commenter who's like, how is this any different than the church accepting tithing? It's like, we don't tell people that they have to, otherwise they'll be separated from their family.
We're literally asking for $1, and we're even flexible on that. Do $0, we don't really care. We just appreciate the support.
The LDS Church literally says, like, pay us before you feed your children.
Yeah.
Like, if you're having financial troubles, please do not support us on Patreon.
Yeah, no, not asking for that. It's just if you have the means and you wanna.
Yeah.
That's the end.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.